Hey, welcome back. In today's video, we are again gonna take a look at framermotion's scroll animations. But this time, we're gonna combine it with great usage of CSS masks. So this week, I came across a website that was sign of the day on the awards website. And that website was the Runway website. And the really cool thing they did is they have this, I guess, airplane window on their website. And if you scroll this main hero, you kind of zoom into that. And then a screenshot of their apps becomes available. And from that point on, you start scrolling through the rest of the website. And I thought this is a great use case of CSS masks. Even though they didn't use it, I thought let's build it that way because it's super interesting to teach. So what we're going to be building in this video is exactly this. We're going to recreate that airplane window as well. And if you scroll, you see this gray area, which could be an app screenshot, become visible as well and scroll into view. And from that point on, the rest of the website would simply follow. And we're going to build this with framermotion as well and also use the CSS masks for it. So let's get to it. So I've quickly switched back to our starting point. This will be the starting point of today's video. And actually, as part of the frontendfyi Pro program that I released a few weeks ago, there's actually also a video where we build this initial setup, as well as a video after this one where we will also make this responsive. So be sure to check that out if you're interested in that too. So what we're going to be doing is we are going to add this scroll logic. So first, let's have a brief look at the HTML that's already there. First, you see there's a top grid, which is pretty much the whole hero. In there is one column, which is the white square. And the second one is another grid that actually has the left section as well as the button on the right side. Then underneath that, there is one div with an empty span in there, which is actually this, what could be the screenshot of the app. And right underneath there is some more paragraphs of text, simply so we have some room to scroll in a minute. And that is our starting point. One thing I already did is I also installed framermotion, which is something you have to do right now if you didn't do so yet. But that's our starting point for today. And the question now becomes, how are we going to get this screenshot image right in this position? And I don't want to use any position absolute or fixed because that makes positioning a lot harder. So what I want to do is actually I want to pull this screenshot right underneath our main hero. So right now our hero has a height of stream, which means that it's 100 VH in height. So we could use that knowledge by adding a margin top of minus 100 VH, which will pull the whole screenshot right underneath it, as you can see. You can see that the blue background of the section underneath it is lying here, and you can also see that the text is also overlaying our main hero image. And the reason things are overlapping is because if something is next in the DOM order, it will always stack on top of each other unless you use a Z index. So let's do that first by adding one more div around our hero section. And in there, we are gonna give it a class name of position relative and a Z index of 10. So now you see that our main hero is lying on top of all of the other content. But we can still see the background shining through this, which is not what we want. For now, we're gonna add a background of Slate 900 to our div, so everything is again, seems like normal. But as you can see, the content is still stacked behind it. Because we're pulling it up 100 VH, we also need to give this a height of stream, which is also 100 VH. So the content that comes after it won't get pulled up as well, but will stay right underneath it. So now both of these sections have the exact same height. And now we have this. You might already start seeing where I want to use these masks. What I want to do is I want to cut out this window so you can really look through it like it is a window. And for that, we can use the pretty new CSS mask solution. So how do you use these CSS masks? Let me quickly open up my inspector and let's just take our main grid. If we on there would use a webkit-mask-image, which is still vendor prefix, but in a minute PostCSS will do that for us, so you can forget this pretty much. So just imagine we are writing mask image here, and then we're adding linear gradient of black, transparent. You already see that we kind of create a fade out effect. And the way this works is the gradient makes a gradient that goes from black to transparent, and anything that's fully black will be fully visible, anything that's fully transparent will be hidden, and anything in between will be opacity kind of in between. So we can use this to create a mask and to cut out specific things that we want. And this is exactly what we're going to use to peek through our window. So let's remove this for now, and let's add our own custom window mask. The CSS masks are not something that's currently supported fully in Tailwind unless you use arbitrary values for everything. But I've decided to actually go into our index CSS, and we're going to add a new class name, window mask in here. So that way, if we go back to our white div, we can add a class name window mask on here, and then it will also be applied. So for our mask image, we're going to use a linear gradient that goes from black to black. So that means that everything will simply be visible. However, we're going to use a second mask image, which is really an image. And that image has as a URL window.svg. And that window.svg, if you take a look at it, is simply a black square with rounded corners, exactly like our window. And in this case, the color it has doesn't matter at all. And that is because we're going to do something slightly different. We're going to use another property called mask composite exclude. And what that will do is it will exclude this window from everything that's visible. So that way we can use our image to become almost like a cutout stamp of the things we want to be able to peek through. And as you can see, it is now stacking all of the windows as much as fit within the view, and it is cutting all of them out, and we're looking through it to our bluish or dark grayish background. However, we don't want to see 3 of them, we only want to see 1. And for that, we can use mask repeat, no repeat, which is exactly the same as a background image you would repeat. And then we can also give our mask a size, where our linear gradient should simply be auto, and then our SVG should be 300 pixels wide, just like our window, which is also always 300 pixels wide. And then finally, again, just like a normal image, we can use position to put this gap in exactly the right spot. So we use mask position for that. Then we have our gradient, which is simply in the center. And then the second argument is for our window, which will be in the center and then on the right with a distance of 3 rem from the right side. And as you can see, that then moves our mask in exactly the right position. We can now peek through this white div and see what's lying behind it. Pretty cool, right? The only thing is, just a minute ago, I added this background color to our wrapper div. So that is actually what we're seeing now. So if I would go back to our wrapper div and remove this background slate, you already see that we can see the card. But now we still have the problem that we also see this blue background. So that's still something we have to fix. How are we gonna do that? We cannot simply add the background color, because if we would add that, like you saw just a minute ago, you cannot peek through it anymore. So we're gonna take a different approach here. we're actually going to use a gradient in the background, a gradient that leaves us with a transparent gap in the middle. So for that, I'm also going to use a new custom class that we are going to call hero background. And the hero background class is also a class that we're going to define ourselves. So let's start by adding a background property that will be a linear gradient. And that gradient will go from top to bottom. So we're going to add to bottom in here. And then as a starting color, we need to have this grayish blue color to start with. So we can use any color in Tailwind from theme by using the theme function and then adding colors, slate 900. And then we want this color to apply all the way to 100 pixels. And at that point, at exactly 100 pixels, it should become transparent. And if we do that, you see that we get a line of 100 pixels in height. And from that point on, it will be transparent. And we want it to be transparent until, for example, the 75% mark. From that point on, we again want it to be colors.slate.900, also at exactly the 75% mark. Because if we wouldn't add it, you already see what happens, and that is that it tries to fade the color again. So by adding exactly the same stop, we tell it that it really has a harsh cut from one color to the other. And this way, we already have our top and bottom gradient exactly as we want them. So that means we just need to add one more gradient to do the same trick horizontal as well. So let's add a linear gradient again, and this time we go to the right. Then we start again with our colors.slate.900, and we start at 24 pixels. Then at that point, we have a harsh cut to transparent, also at 24 pixels. And if you do that, you already see that we get a blue bar on the side as well, which is the 24 pixels in width. So that means that the only thing we still have to do is do the same thing on the other side. And then we have a square, which is blue on the outsides, where you can still peek through because it's transparent in the middle. So that means that we need to specify until where it's transparent, for which we're going to use a calc, because it's 100% of the width minus 24 pixels. And then we're again going to use our theme color also on 100% minus 24 pixels. And this already gives us exactly the same background, but now with a transparent gap. And perhaps to make it a little bit more clear, let's make our background have an opacity of 50 for now, maybe even 20. And then you can see that we have this square in the middle that doesn't have a background color. Of course, there's multiple ways you could build something similar like this, but I think using a gradient here is really a nice solution that's also very performant as well. And now we have this set up, it is time to add some scrolling logic in here. Let's remove the opacity and let's start using framermotion. In framermotion, in order to attach an animation to scrolling, you are going to use a custom hook called useScroll. And that hook is imported from framermotion. And one of the things that this hook returns is an object that contains a property called scrollY progress. So this gives you a number between 1 and 0 of where in the full range of scroll that element is currently at. However, of course, it needs to know what scroll you're looking at. And therefore, we need to add an object as well that takes a ref as a property. So let's first create a ref here, for which we use React useRef that has a null as a default value. And then we're going to take our ref and add that to our hero div. So now we can take this ref and set that ref as a target in our useScroll. As a second property, we're also going to use offset, and that tells framermotion from where it should count the scrolling. You see all of the different options here, for which you definitely should check out the docs if you want to learn more of them. But we're going to use an offset that starts with start and goes until end. So that means that the start of the element is the start of the animation and the end of the element is the end of the animation. And now we have this scroll_y_progress variable. We can use this to calculate something else. For example, we want to zoom in on our hero component. So that means that we're going to scale this up based on the scroll. So let's create a new variable called scale, which is useTransform, which also comes from framermotion. And that takes in 3 arguments. The first one is the scroll_y_progress. And then, as you can see Copilot already suggests, it takes in 2 arrays. And the values it takes in here is pretty much a mapping from one range to another range. So we know that our scroll_y_progress goes from 0 to 1. And then we tell our transform what kind of scale we want to have in that case. So if the scroll_y_progress is 0, so we're still at the top, we want to have a scale of 1. And if we're at the end of our scroll, we want to have a scale 12. So this will scale our element times 12 when it scrolls down. So in order to use this scale, we need to make our div a motion.div. So if we change that motion.div, then we also need to import that from framermotion again. And then also need to close our div, of course, as a motion.div. And by doing that, we can use the style property. However, this is a framermotion enhanced style property, you could say, because in here we can add these animated values. These aren't simply a scale value, a number, but they are really animated values that have a lot more properties. So we can simply copy this scale as a style on here. And then before we can start scrolling, we need to do a few more things. We need to make sure that our wrapper div has a very specific height, because we need to have some sort of distance to scroll instead of only the visible portion in the window. So I'm actually going to make this a height of 200 viewport height. So we have 200 viewport height to scroll to instead of only the visible portion. That also means that we need to go to our second div and make that minus 200 viewport height. So we still pull the content up far enough. And then we have some distance to scroll. If we start scrolling, you see that it zooms in our image. And that is all attached to the scroll position of our image. Because as soon as we've reached that 200 viewport height, you see that everything just scrolls out of view. It is totally broken now though. And it is broken because you see that scroll bar here. And that of course happens because we're scaling everything and nothing fits in our view anymore. So for that, we can simply add overflow clip to our wrapper div. So that way nothing will overflow our parent. And if you then scroll, you see that there's no scroll bars and eventually we get to our other content on the page. Okay, this already starts to become something. However, we are now zooming into the center of our image, which doesn't make sense at all, of course. We need to zoom into this window. And for that, we can simply use a CSS transform origin, because that tells the browser where the scale is happening. By default, it happens in the center, but by setting a custom origin, we can make it scale from a different position. And if we choose the position of the window, it looks like we're zooming into that window. Because if you, for example, use origin top right and start scrolling, you see that we zoom into the top right corner. So it's only a matter of finding the right values now, for which, of course, we need to use the square brackets or the arbitrary values because it's something totally custom. And I've been playing around with this percentage a little bit already, and I found out that 90% on the x-axis and 40% on the y-axis seems to be actually pretty accurate. Because if I add that in and we scroll, you see that it already looks like we're zooming into our window. That's so cool, right? Now, there's a few things still happening. The first thing is that our app window is already scrolling out of view before we can even properly see it. So we're going to do a few things for that. First, instead of the height of the screen for our image wrapper, we're actually also going to use 200 viewport height. it makes for that if we start scrolling, that there's more room before the text really appears. Simply because the wrapper around this image div is now a lot higher than it used to be before. And we can then leverage this height by making this image position sticky. Because that way, even though we're past the image now, if it's positioned sticky, it will stay in our view. So if we, for example, add a position sticky and then top of 25%, then you see that the image comes back again and it stays sticky for as long as possible. Because if we keep on scrolling, you see that it disappears because it can't be sticky anymore since there's not enough space. But if we scroll back up, it remains in place and you see that the window comes back as well. And then suddenly the image stays in exactly the same spot and you can really peek through this image. And if you then keep on scrolling, the image scrolls out of view again. Now, one big thing that still bothers me is that the image is static and it's not coming from the right side within the window, just like you can see on the Runway website. If you scroll, you see that the image comes from the right side as well. So for that, we can still use more framermotion. So let's go ahead and, for example, add an image X property, which is a use transform that also looks at the scroll Y. Now, Copilot thought that -1000 would be a really great idea. I think I actually want to go from 50% to 0%. So if we then go to our span and convert that into a motion.span, we can also add the style tag on here and use the X property and set that equal to image X. And if you now scroll, you see that the image already starts moving from left to right. We also see that we got another scroll bar. So that means that we're also going to add an overflowed clip on here as well. So the scroll bar is not visible anymore. Now, what you also see is that the 50% is not enough, but at least you already see the direction we're heading into. The real calculation to get the right position of this window is actually a little bit more complicated. And I fiddled around quite a bit with it. And what I settled on eventually was using a few calcs with dynamic values. And the easiest way to create a calc that is still based on the scroll Y progress is by actually using a quite new framermotion hook called useMotionTemplate. So let's create const image X calc equals to useMotionTemplate. And this motion template works as follows. It takes in two backticks, so you don't execute this function. It works with the backticks automatically. And in there, you can simply add, for example, image X. So if we would use this image calc and add that onto our X, it would still do exactly the same thing, because it simply renders a string with this value. However, instead of creating a percentage, I actually want to use it as a number. So that way we get a number between 50 and 0, and we can do something with that number. What I want to do with that is the following. First, I want to create an X of 50% again by adding back that percentage. But then I also want to add some more distance to this image as well. The distance I want to add is plus, and then we need to use a calc because we're going to do a calculation with two different numbers. And the first number is this image X, but then as a viewport unit. So it will be 50 viewport unit all the way to 0 viewport unit, which means half of the screen. And from that, we're going to subtract the width of the window, which is 300 pixels. So this gives us a value of half of the screen size minus the 300 pixels. And that means that we're also doing a calculation with this percentage and that calc. So for that, we need to wrap it inside another calc as well. And if you do that and start scrolling, you already see that the image is positioned a lot better. And if you then start scrolling, it will just move into place. It will, however, go a bit too far because we're subtracting that 300 pixels. But apart from that, the position is pretty much spot on. But of course, it shouldn't go out of view. That's just ugly, right? But CSS has another function for that, which is called max. And this max function, it takes in two numbers. So our first number will be 0 pixels, and the second one will be our calc. And what max does is it will always take the highest value. So as soon as the calculation of this goes below 0, it will always use 0, which is the default position of our image. And that, if you then start scrolling, will simply stop the image in place. And that's already what we need for the animation. And with these few tricks combined, we already have such a great looking animation. And that brings us to the end of today's video. Over on the frontendfyi website, as part of the Pro plan, I will still make this responsive as well. So definitely go over there and join Pro for the 99 euros it still is, if you want to see that as well. Otherwise, I will also make sure to link the code down in the description like always, where you also find the live playground to experiment with this yourself. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like to this video as well. Subscribe to the channel if you enjoy my videos. And then I hope to see you in the next video.